Where exactly did we get to the last time? I know we're on page 47. Did we finish this section?
Yeah, we finished it all the way to the end of 47.
We finished to the end of 47? And did we go into the beginning of 48 then?
Free from thought, free from appearance, free from planning, free.
Those three. Okay. So I'm going to do a little bit tonight, going back to this text and trying to get into this a little more, I don't know if deeply, but more subtly, because it's involving a really important teaching, both psychologically and philosophically. And it's important we try to get it right, because if we don't get this aspect of it right, both in concept but also in terms of functioning, it's very easy to go wrong in cultivation. And there's been a lot of misunderstanding and misinterpretation around these ideas, wu nian, wu xiang, wu zhu, literally without thought, without appearance, without grasping or dwelling, attaching. And one of the ways we've avoided moving away from a nihilistic, repressed, dull emptiness around these is to translate them as freedom from this kind of thought, freedom from superficial appearances of things, and freedom from clinging or grasping, attaching. So that's where we are, sort of in the bottom of 47. The interesting line he makes here is that freedom from this grasping, attaching, clinging, if we want to use that, you can use it as dwelling, which means getting stuck in one place, one position, or one identity, or one dimension. He says it's the basic nature of human beings. Now this is a fairly strong statement. It seems almost counterintuitive because we have this very, very strong inclination, tendency to reach out, to grasp, attach, to cling. I mean, if you wanted to, from the Buddhas or from an awakened being's scene and portrayal of the condition of living beings, it's seen as a continuous, unstopping, unceasing, grasping, attaching, reaching out, acquiring, wanting, desiring. This kind of activity is almost so endemic and so ubiquitous, we don't even think that actually not doing that might be something. It's almost like people get nervous with the thought of doing nothing, rather than thinking that this would be natural. And so what the Buddha is saying is, once we get spooked, and once we get into this activity, which he calls avidya, confusion, misunderstanding, ignorance, then we go on grasping, and we never stop until something stops us or something causes us to stop. And so it becomes the language they use in Chinese, xi, which means it's actually the picture of a bird's wings flapping like a hummingbird's wings. You can't see the wings, all you see is a blur. It means habituation, habitual energy. So in a sense, we're like freaked out hyper hummingbirds, if you want to use that. And we're buzzing everywhere. And I got hummingbirds in my yard, and they're a joy to watch, but they're also neurotic. I mean, they're just hyper. They're just going all over the place, flower to flower. They go to one flower, they go to the next flower, they go back to the first flower, and they're constantly, and then they're also hyper vigilant. They're like the cops of the flower birdland. Anything that comes in within zone, they go check out. If I go to my porch and I'm eating a peanut, the hummingbird just comes up, looking, checking out, then goes away. A crow comes in, they check it out. A delivery man comes, they check it out. They're very territorial, they're very inquisitive, but they never stop. And the only way they survive at night is they go into a meditative zone-out state. They drop their metabolism down and chill for a while. But the only way they can actually, it's very funny, they can't stop, so they have to sort of drop their metabolism way, way down, and then when the sun comes up, they get it going again. Now, this is a pretty good description of us. We go to sleep at night, the metabolism are a little quiet. We actually feel a little refreshed if we've had a good night's sleep. But then the hummingbird energy kicks in again. So this description, when he says it's our basic nature to not be this way, seems, as I put, counterintuitive. And what he's describing then is the fundamental paradox of this teaching. In other words, when the Buddha has his awakening experience, he goes, strange indeed, how unexpected that I have had all of this whole complete potential to be a liberated, completely functioning, unattached, unbound living being, and I never realized it because this was so all-consuming. And it wasn't until I stopped, really stopped this mad mind from just generating all this hyperactivity, did I realize I'm all whole and complete, and everything I need to know and would want to know, or that's knowable, was in my reach all the time, and I was constantly just covering over this hyperactivity. So he said, paradoxically, our habit energy is not our fundamental nature. It's a misguiding, it's a twisting, it's a confusion within the nature. It's a misfunctioning, but it's not the fundamental. That's why he can say, very importantly, when you cultivate, there's nothing to get. There's nothing to seek. Because that would imply that that nature then wasn't whole and complete. That wasn't our basic nature, and our basic nature was to grasp and attach, and therefore we would have to replace it with something else. So there's a kind of a paradox here that's, on one hand, makes sense, but on the other hand, behaviorally, we don't make sense of it because we are so caught up in this, so caught up in the grasping. Even when we come to spiritual practice, we want to get enlightened. We want to have a Bodhi experience. We want a Satori moment. And it's just basically spiritual shopping. It's just basically the shopping mind that wants to get and acquire applied to this. And it won't work. And so what he's doing, he's trying to stop us with this language of using woo, 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 or boo, boo. He's saying, stop, stop, stop. He's not saying nothing, nothing, nothing. He's saying, stop. You're okay. Everything's okay, no problem. Stop and realize that you have this innate fullness and whatnot. Because if you don't stop grasping, attaching, running wildly, you'll never be able to see it. It's like you're just whirling through, and everything's a blur and a blaze. And that's what he actually used. He says, this inflames the world of your senses. It inflames the world of experience. And you could say, by extension, it literally inflames the world. Because this activity heats up. And you want to go to the heart of where global warming is coming from. It's not that the sun's getting too close. It's because we are heating up, heating up, heating up, literally and figuratively. And as a result, we are causing a transformation in our environment. And instead of creating a pure land, we're creating a hell on earth. So this has ramifications. It's not just psychological. It goes into other dimensions here. But what he's saying is stop. And this is, to some extent, vipassana. Shamatha vipassana means stopping, contemplating, quieting down and observing, calmness and insight. Because we don't see when we're writing so fast. We can't see. And so this is a very important part. So then he says, how you would be with this, he says, even if you encounter all kinds of things, insults, criticism, verbal attacks, bullying, treat these all as empty and harbor no thoughts, either of delight or rebellion. Just let go of this. Don't let it move you. In each continuing moment of thought, do not dwell on previous thoughts. So now he's giving a very interesting, what he's defining when he says Wu Nian, freedom from thought, he doesn't mean not thinking. This is very important. And this line, I think, substantiates that. If he said, not thinking means don't think any thought, have no thoughts, good luck. good luck. What he's saying here, look at this passage. In each continuum moment of thought, so there are moments of thought. Our minds are working. We are observing, we are aware, we are cognizant, we're discerning, we're discriminating. He's not saying stop all that. Just don't hang on to it. Don't dwell on it. You know, it's sort of like one of the images he used. Something appears in front of the mirror reflects it. When that thing is gone, the mirror has nothing to reflect anymore. And so the same way, if you say, stop all thought, you would basically spray paint the mirror black. That's not what's being described here. It's just saying something appears, see it for what it is. Be really, truly catching it in its essence and not projecting or fantasizing about what it is or isn't. And then it goes, because nothing stays. There's nothing that stays, and so you respond accordingly. When it comes, you respond accordingly, and when it's gone, you don't look after it, you don't try to hang on to it, you don't regret that it's gone. So that's the idea. He says, do not dwell on previous thoughts. Let them go. Let that experience go. If you think about the previous thoughts, and then the present thought, and you take up future thoughts, if you're constantly in the past, the future, and even fretting in the present, then your thoughts will continue without cease. This is bondage. So he's talking about a kind of a free-flowing, nimble responsiveness without grasping at either end or in the middle. Let go, release your hold. But don't stop in the reflective, responsive mode. Now, the only thing that's comparable to this sometimes artists get into this space. They can feel as if their moment of creativity is in that immediate attention to things as they are evolving right on the tip of their brush to their arm, to their heart, to their mind. It's a non-dual oneness. Sometimes I was with a friend today whose father was the theorist behind this. His name is Csikszentmihalyi. He was at Chicago. He called it flow theory. It's a very interesting psychological, spiritual concept. But in any event, it had to do with trying to get into when are human beings at their optimal in terms of their performance and creativity, whether athletics, art, perhaps even science and invention. It's when this self disappears and the object and subject become totally at one with the fusion of something. I know it in a very crude way in martial arts, because if you're going to do successful sparring in martial arts, you definitely can't have a future thought, because if you do, the thing that actually comes will not be what you anticipated. So you think, oh, so-and-so is going to kick me with that leg, and then you don't see it coming from here. On the other hand, if you came from here and you think, oh, it came from here, so like previous kick, you look over there, you won't get the next one. So this wu wei, it's called, or wuxian no mind, or freedom mind, open mind, means you are just totally responding as it arises and no more, no less. So this has different applications, but you can see where he's going. It's not deadness, but there's no way, there's no place you're stuck. If in each continuing moment of thought you do not cling to anything at all, this is freedom from bondage. And this is the meaning of not clinging as our basis. So he's not talking about not doing. He's not talking about not being. He's talking about not clinging, not attaching, not stopping. Now, it's two things. He's saying it's our basic nature, but from a deeper understanding, it's also the nature of things as they really are. See, this is how it works, because otherwise it's like the nature of how it is and what I'm doing are two different things. Okay? The nature of things as they are sucks. I don't like it, right? And I'm going to go about shifting and changing and manipulating it to match up with my likes. This text or these teachings are saying the nature of things as they really are, there's nothing that stops. In our experience, in our human experience, to the best of whatever we know, there's nothing that that's unchanging. Okay, this is like, wow. And that's basically a statement of anatta, or anatman. There is nothing that is unchanging. And so this being the nature of things and everything being unchanging, then you can respond by fighting that. And you can say, I don't like that. I remember last week the Silicon Valley CEO says, yes, there is aging, sickness, and death, and I don't like that script at all. And I'm going to recast it to remove it. So then you have a disconnect between your philosophy, your behavioral psychology, and the nature of reality. And you presume, maybe you're right, that you can then change the nature of reality. Now, I mentioned last week the Greeks said, careful about going down that road. But we have sort of lost caution on that, so I don't know where this is going to play out. But we feel as if we can change the nature of reality. This is what Bill Gibbon calls the end of nature. We feel like nature is its natural processes is over. We're in control. And as a historian, I shudder to think, because the people that are in control of this are the same people that brought us World War I, World War II. Okay. So not a good scenario. Without wisdom and control, this could be backtrack. He is saying, therefore, because it's the nature of how things are, then our nature, in being accord with that, but also accept the fact that there's nothing to get, nothing to cling to, nothing to attain, which could sound like loss, which could sound like defeatism. Now he's making an opposite statement. He says, not only is it not loss, but it's full gain. By accepting that, you tap into the fullness of your being, what he calls the essential nature, the Buddha nature, which lacks nothing, is whole and complete. But it has to work in sync with the nature of things as they really are. That's why you can't grasp and attach and try to stop it. At the same time, you have to let go of the urge to do that, because that urge is coming from avidya. It's not coming from true vision. So it's almost like we believe things are unchanging, yet in our psyche, we haven't really accepted it. We haven't really, and therefore, he says, that's where anxiety, fear, and dread, and so forth comes on. Because we don't accept that. Anyhow, so this goes into, then he says, good and wise friends, remaining detached from all outward appearances is called freedom from forms or marks. If you stay detached from forms or appearances, and dharmas are essentially pure, this is the meaning of freedom from forms is the essence. Dharma is essentially pure. This is really an important thing. He is saying that things are what they are. They're not pure or impure intrinsically. It's only in identifying, grasping, attaching, and pushing away that we make them into things. This is the meaning. We go back to the earlier verse of Shensho and Hui Neng. Shensho says, there's dust, sweep it clean. Don't let it alight. And Hui Neng is saying, there is no dust. Basically, there's not one thing, because the dust is only made defiled by your thinking, by your grasping or attaching. Otherwise, it's not. So it's like, oh, that's a different state. Now let's go to this next one. Good and wise friends, when the mind remains undefiled within all sensory states, this is called freedom from thought. In your thoughts, you're always impassive and detached from sensory states. You do not rouse your mind over them. Okay, so far so good. So you might conclude from that, I'm going to be a pumpkin. Or I'm going to be a rock. Okay? I'm going to remain impassive and detached. I'm impassive and detached. Outside. And you can see this because there are cultivators, seeming cultivators, who have this style. You can see it in the Zen movies. You know, the Zen, and they're just doing their beads. You know, and the monastery's on fire, sir. Sure. Thus it is. You know. Or there's some emotional scene and they are impassive like a statue. And this is the I guess it's the Bali Holly, China Wally wood version of what this would look like. And it's not real. It's not the real thing. But it's represented this way. So then people think, I'll be like them. And then they imitate that external form, which is impassive, detached, unmoving. No show of feeling, emotion whatsoever. And that's considered to be wu nian, wu qing. Okay? It ain't. This is my hypothesis tonight. I'm going to go into this, so be patient. What he's saying is, when you encounter all the conditions, internal, external, you're not roused, you're not moved off center. This is different than you don't respond. Rouse is a little more than respond. Rouse is what happens in the Frankenstein movie when the guy goes on and says to the crowd, there's a monster. And he rouses up the crowd and they get their flaming torches and they're going to the castle to burn it down and kill Frankenstein. Now, if he said, there's a monster, they said, that's interesting. Something to note. Let's pay attention. No. That's responding. That's consideration. When you get to the lynch mob state, that's roused. Okay? So don't rouse your mind over it. Doesn't mean you don't have a response and you don't notice. And he goes on further. If, however, you do not think of anything at all and completely eradicate thought, and I'm going to say feeling, because Nian is not just abstract thought. It's the whole spectrum of mental sensibilities and response, including the emotions. Until the last thought entirely ceases, you will die and reborn in some other place. So he said, even if you repress your thought, the karma from thought repressed will continue to be regenerated in another form. Students of the way, take heed that this is a big mistake. So he's putting us in a position between, on one hand, a seeming impassive, detached state and an insensate, repressed state. And he's saying what he means by that is you do not cling or grasp, but it doesn't mean you go dead and don't feel. So what I wanted to do tonight, you had a question.
From my context of Theravada practice, there's a huge emphasis on feeling, and that being the place where the chain of reactivity can be broken. Here I hear the idea of feeling or vedana kind of being a secondary, at best, kind of approach. So is
here, where's here?
In this text, it
Oh.
feels like feeling is not as emphasized, and I'm just curious, am I missing something?
I think it's a misreading of the text, and I'll give you some examples tonight because I want to go into this a little bit. In fact, it's very much a part of this text. So when we get to the lively encounters, when the student-teacher relationship comes out, this is soap opera plus. There's a lot of feelings floating around in here. There's joy, there's tears, there's anger, there's frustration, there's scolding, there's praise. There's a lot of feelings going on. And in fact, the feelings associated with the affliction become the release point. So this is very interesting. But let me go into this a little bit. What I wanted to do now, in the time I have left, is digress a little. But it's an informed digression. So here's where I'm going to go, and we'll see where we get into this. If you're interested in this, fine. If you're not, that's okay. Go to sleep. I have a friend, a Confucian scholar, and we've been working on something, for the last year and a half now in conversation, and now we got some rough notes we're putting together. She works primarily with the Confucian text. She says she doesn't have a Buddhist bone in her body. But it's not true, but that's okay. And the question we're both asking, both have what she calls the Confucian teachings and I call the Buddhist teachings, which I rather actually call transformative teaching rather than Buddhist. I wouldn't use, if you say awakened teachings are the teachings of awakening, well, then that implies that these are transformative teachings. They're not, they're enlightening teachings. They're awakening teachings. In a sense, they're therapeutic teachings. So I wouldn't use Buddhism. In any event, we both notice that there is a sense that the human being has an immense potential for perfectibility in both traditions. In that tradition, it's more talked about as a junza, the accomplished or the exemplary person, and sometimes the sage is presented as someone who has cultivated the human to the point that there's just no defiled thoughts, aspirations, longings, ulterior motives, that the human personality is just really at a high refined state, alert, engaged in the world, doing things appropriately, serving humanity. So it's actually mapped out in three different ways. One, they reach the state of what's called Ming De. They have a radiance of their intrinsic virtue, and then they are able to stay in that state. They're able to maintain that equilibrium and not depart from it, like today I'm good, tomorrow I'm bad, tomorrow I'm bad. No, they're able to, and then the third step they take is to radiate this and to support the world, to help the world. So there's a outgoing part to it, which if you look at it from, the awakening to the bodhisattva vows, you see a similar pattern. But the thing we're interested in asking is, what is the nature of bringing about that transformation or that refinement of the human? How is it done? Which is sometimes called self-cultivation. So both use the term cultivation or self-cultivation. So that's what we're looking at. Particularly, we're both interested in emotions. What's the role and place, the proper role and place of emotions within self-cultivation? Are they put down? Are they ignored? Are they talked about? And in what ways are they talked about? Are they seen as obstacles and impediments? Or are they seen as possible instruments for awakening? How is it dealt with? And of course, we're working against a lot of things, a lot of interpretations within both traditions about what it means. Because sometimes in the tradition she's coming from, the personal, the emotional, the feeling world is, and she says it's a misinterpretation, is repressed for the social structure or for the family. In other words, you relegate, you sublimate, you actually push down any personal feelings, emotions, wants, or desires for the state or the society or the family, which she says is a misinterpretation. And sometimes in the Buddhist sense, and she is very forthright in saying, my impression is that the goal is to repress and stop emotion. That's the common. So we have these common misperceptions and stuff. So I'm looking one way, she's looking the other way. So I just pulled out my notes that I have ongoing. So if you want, this is not ready for anything, but it's kind of rough. But I thought I would share with you my thinking. And what I'm doing with my approach lately is I'm trying to combine three things in my research and writing. One is I'm trying to use the primary text, these sources, really go into them and read them closely and deeply as my primary thing. Then I'm also trying to use my experiences with my teacher and the instructions I got, day to day over the past years. And then finally my own laboratory experiences, my own cultivation. So I'm trying to bring these three into some triangulation to look at this. So I'm going on this. First, I'm making an argument that emotions are part of the mind. This is part of the field of the mind. And the mind itself is Buddha. Okay? I'm just this is the theory. So therefore, emotions must be intrinsic to and part of Buddha. How could they not be? Because they're part of the field of the mind. So that's when it says, Whanau Joshiputi, the afflictions, even if you want to call them afflictions, and that's the sake of argument. I'm not even going to go there tonight. I'm not even going to say they're afflictions, but let's say you have that persuasion, you think emotions are afflictions. Nonetheless, they have to be integral to Bodhi. So somehow the afflictions turn into Bodhi. So even if you want to map emotions as negative, They still have to be worked with and incorporated and transformed. You cannot, quote, literally get rid of them. Because if you get rid of them, you get rid of Bodhi. I mean, so that's why my teacher says, you have to transform afflictions to Bodhi. If you get rid of afflictions, you've gotten rid of Bodhi, because afflictions are Bodhi. And that's like the ice and water thing. So you have ice. If you get rid of the ice, you've gotten rid of the water. You have to transform the ice into the water. It's one substance in different forms. So afflictions and Bodhi are different manifestations of the true mind. How it's functioning. There's no other thing outside of that. So that's the theory. So then we go from that. The Avatamsaka says, within this ordinary mind, the ordinary human, we find the Buddha mind. Not outside. The Sixth Patriarch says this thing, where's Bodhi? It's in the Pure Land, your next life. Thank you, there's a few. No, it's here in this present conditioned world that we live in. He says looking for outside is like looking for a rabbit with horns. Okay? So again, you see both texts. The Avatamsaka, the Sixth Patriarch, is locating Bodhi, Buddhahood, within the here and now, within the human, and not outside of that. And so all that is part of being a human is the stuff of awakening. Now, it's not the stuff just as it exists, don't get me wrong, but it is the raw material from which this is transformed. For example, a diamond is a piece of coal that has been pressured under heat for a long time. It becomes a diamond. There aren't diamonds outside of coal. Okay, so it's like similar substance, different form. So the question then is, if it goes that way, I'm moving more along these lines that emotions somehow inform and advise. They tell us something. But at the same time, you can't let them overcome and overwhelm and control. So that they're very powerful things. They're very powerful tools. Misused, they can enslave and inebriate. But used properly, they can attune and inform. And so like we have these I see the emotions as very, very precious, subtle tools within our human toolbox to work with. They can be raw and coarse, but they can also be fine. So where I'm working on a sort of alignment is to sort of say, you don't eliminate, you elevate. You don't eliminate emotions, you elevate them. And you don't repress them, rather you refine them. So there's a refining process that goes in to working with the emotions. And you start with what you have, and there's a process of observing how are these emotions having an effect on me and those around me. So this is very much in accord with a sutta, maybe I'll spend a whole night on sometime, called the Mango Sutta, where the Buddha's talking to his son Rahula, who's only 7 years old. And he's telling Rahula how to use his body and his mind and his emotions as a cultivating tool. And basically what he's saying to him, in anything that you think of doing, saying, entertaining internally, before you do it, read, discern, note, is this going to mess me up in some way? Is this going to cause afflictions to arise? Greed, anger, disturbance, jealousy, harm, blah, blah, blah. And also, is that going to happen to others when I do say or think this? So he has two dimensions he asks them to reflect on. That means he's got to be attuned. You cannot not know what the effect is unless you have the emotions as one of your tools. You say, I don't have any emotion. Well, I'm sorry, it's like you're anesthetized then. It's like, hey, I don't feel anything. I'm carving into my skin. Yeah, because you pinched it off the nerves. You see, and so it's like the nerves, the emotions, all of these are vital tools of discovery. And you can't even know what somebody else is responding to what unless you're aware of the range. That people won't say, hey, you upset me. Oh, really? No, they'll show it in their face, they'll show it in their body, they'll show it in a blush, and you have to be able to read those feelings and emotions to be able to discern and steer by. So it's not like we can avoid them, but what we have to do is master them as exquisite tools, almost like a doctor's surgical kit, and use them in that way. So I'm sort of moving along those lines, and I'm sort of moving towards the idea that emotions are a vital and necessary component of the mind in Buddhism, and thus a vital and necessary ground for self-cultivation and awakening. They're not intrinsically bad or harmful or ignorant, and they're not to be repressed, but they're not to be indulged. Nor are they to be removed and destroyed because they're prerequisites for Bodhi. But they have to be, quote, crossed over is the language that's used. How do you cross them over? And I'm sort of getting into this idea that the really powerful, brute, coarse, negative ones, lust, violence, aggression, these naturally weaken and shrivel as you begin to hold precepts and cultivate. When you're holding precepts and cultivating, these really are like shooting yourself in the leg or the foot. I'm talking about this, that dramatic. They're so coarse. They're so powerfully destructive. You cannot help but feeling, this is really harming me. Really harming me. This is really unhealthy. And then you go from, full-blown anger tantrum. And you can feel that too. And so you just start. It's like saying, hey, I put my hand on the fire, it hurt. And you pull it back. You say, no, what happened? No, you remember. You don't. Now you might go nearer to the fire, you might go near the warmth, but as it starts, you pull back. This mechanism, this feedback mechanism, is self-cultivation. We have it. We're going from the very coarse, killing, stealing, licentiousness, drunkenness, lying. These things have a reverberation through the system of our being that at the beginning grounds, just merely beginning to hold the precepts and meditate a little bit, you feel as a steamroller coming over you and you're just, okay, I'm not there anymore. You pull back naturally, not because you're renouncing them, because you do not want to be crushed and overwhelmed and enslaved by them. You don't want to be destroyed by them. It's like a grenade going off in your system. But the more subtle forms of that, like let's just take anger. Anger can go to maybe... let's say it's full-blown violent rage, can come back to explosive verbal, which can go back to seething, right? Doesn't go out in anybody. Just seething, like people meet you and they're like, ooh, I think I go lightly here because you're seething. I think if I say something wrong, except kids. Kids are like, oh, it exploded, how much fun. And then it goes to sort of frustration. Then it goes to mild irritation. You see, there's a spectrum of these emotions. And what you're doing when you're cultivating, you're moving from the coarse and the raw to more refined, more refined, more refined. And as you get there, you're actually saying, before it gets to here, it goes to here. Mild irritation is what I'm paying attention here. I don't even want that movement. Because as I still myself and I notice my effect on each other in the world, my mild irritation also. It's not like full-blown violent rage, but it still irritates, it still rubs, it still makes disharmony. So you can see that you're actually on a path of what I would say intense awareness and attunement, rather than repressing and shutting down. Now, let me go to another part of this, which is like if we take the idea of love, and then some people say, well, cut off desire, cast out love. That's the translation of a Buddhist phrase. Cut off desire, cast out love. Okay, to me that sounds a bit harsh and repressive. So then what are you supposed to do with these things? And if we're following the refinement model, probably what's talking about when it says cut off desire, it's called tersna, trishna. And that's talking about an unquenchable psychological thirst driven by avidya, ignorance. And this is the thirst for desires and sensuality, it's a thirst for immortality, and the thirst to be unfeeling. That's what it means to cut off desire. It means recognize these thirsts as totally unhealthy and unproductive. They can't, and they're coming from an unquenchable. Then what's the love? Well, it really means lust. Okay? It doesn't mean you don't love. Okay, now, wait, what do you mean? All you need is love? No. I'm not going there. I'm saying that one word that we use in English is really brutally unsophisticated. Okay, now what happens, let's say we have that one word love. Okay, and two people are standing there, and do you so-and-so take so-and-so to love and behold and be, and they're in love and they get married. And then you say, I love that pizza. That's different. I love my job. I love competition. What? Whoa. We got love going. I mean, I don't have to brainstorm here. You can go all the ways it's used. Well, how does it work with us? We use it in context. So love at the altar is different than love at the arena, which is different than love in church, and love in the hospital. Okay? We know that, but we use that one word. So it's really interesting. I'm sort of trying to get the Chinese, and sometimes my Chinese is very rudimentary. But I think sometimes it's either used when you get the compound that goes with it, helps define it. But again, there's also context. For example, I'll give you, tonight when you ask in this text, there is a passage here where, let's find it. Everybody know when the Sixth Patriarch's about to leave, Hui Neng has, he's about to go. We're on page 16. Page 16 in your text. This is an example of your question about it seems to be lack. There's a verse he has, top of 16. Basically, what he's saying is, you've cultivated, you've understood the way and the Dharma, and now I'm sending you out to be a teacher like I am, and go out. Now, why would he go out? Because he's got to make a living. And if he's got to make a living, and he can make a living by being a great master and getting a lot of red envelopes. So that's why he's telling him, get out, because he's mooching at the monastery. And he knows, no, he's not. He's saying go out. Why? For feeling. Huh? Go out and be impassive and unmoving? No, go out because you want to help liberate people from suffering. Go out and practice this medicine. Because you're attuned now, and you can use your feelings and emotions as diagnostic tools of discovery and liberation. Oh, and look at his line. Out of caring, I'm planting this seed. Now that's the fifth patriarch saying, out of caring, my caring, I'm planting this seed in you. I'm giving you the business. I'm giving you the bodhisattva business here. And he says, because of the ground, your nature, all these fruits will ripen. Without this feeling, there'd no be seed planted. If I didn't give a damn, and I was unmoving and impassive, every man for himself, Amitabha, then I wouldn't do this. Now this word is qing, right? What's the tone?
Qing.
Qing, second tone. And this has been translated without emotion, without feeling. And we looked at it and said, no, this qing here is not the qing of lust or anger. It's the one of caring. He's caring, so you have to put it in the context. It doesn't say, because he's emotional, he's sending him out. What? It doesn't make sense. It's not emotion. It's tender father, son, mother, child thing that's going on here. Because if he had emotion, he'd say, don't go. I need you. I love you. You make me feel good. You're my enlightened disciple. I want you. No. He's saying, because I care, I'm sending you out. See, this is the same. That's qing. So if you look, I will not go as long. I've got lots of notes here to talk about this. Let me just give you an example. The Greeks were also aware, although some people think, the Greeks were, dumb, or the Greeks were the Greeks long ago, or the Greeks were the West, and the West is not the East, and the East is better than, get away from that. The Western philosophy of the Greeks was very subtle in this regard, not just on the intellect, but the emotions. They had at least 4 significant terms they used for the concept of love, all of them different. And they express a range of human action based on this, what you want to call emotion, that was very interesting. Now, the first one they had was eros. And eros, of course, means physically intimate. But it also means, the same word also means the creative force behind the arts and the sciences. So the artist, the scientist, the discoverer, the creator is working with eros, this impulse, this feeling, this emotion within the human. So that's the first one. The next one they go to is very interesting. It's philia, Philia, philia. And it's the love between brothers and sisters, sisters and sisters. It's the brotherly expression of love, which is different than eros. It's still a form of love. But you see, we're going across as a range. And what they would call almost like a negative emotion would be rage. So you have, the Iliad, the wrath of Achilles. That's not love. That's wrath. So they had a word for wrath. Wrath is not something you want, but it's an emotion. They don't say all emotions. There's some emotions that work, some that don't. Some are refined, some are coarse. So you have philia. Then you have an interesting one called agape. That's the third one. And agape is really interesting because that's the one, it means love of humanity, but also love of beings, living beings, fellow beings. It's more like empathy. And it means that you have to open up in your own heart the ability to see another being as frail and as easily hurt as yourself. So this is Albert Schweitzer. I am life that wills to live in the midst of life that wills to live. This sensibility is agape. Oh, and that's called love. Now the last one, and then I'll stop for tonight and maybe come back to this if you're interested later, is the one that's really interesting called storge. It's S-T-O-R-G-E. And storge is the one that doesn't get much attention, but this is a very tender, caring affection uniting parents and child, grandparents and grandchildren, and student and teacher. So storge should reflect the loving, caring relationship, and that's Qing in this caring here for the Sixth Patriarch. It's not eros, it's not even philia. It's a bit more like agape because he's saying out of this caring, and later you see the Sixth Patriarch uses the same thing. Out of my caring, I pass it on to the next generation of disciples. So, all I'm trying to point out here is that first of all, it's not absent from these texts, these narratives, and it's here in a very, I would say, refined way, but what's the word I want to use? Necessary. It's like you cannot cultivate to sagehood, to bodhisattvahood, to awakening, whatever, without working with and through and perfecting these. And I'll make a kind of a rough statement here. I think, and this is where I'm going now in my last conclusion, that I think when they're refined, when these emotions are refined, they become like the 4 Brahma Viharas. The refined emotions are kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. In other words, in their coarse forms, they're selfish, grasping, greedy, wanting, craving. But when they're refined, they don't go away. They crystallize into something that's virtue, these 4 unlimited minds. So I'm asking, I don't think the Bodhisattva is devoid of emotion. I think the Bodhisattva is fully developed emotionally. I think that's a different expression. And I don't think they lack emotion, but I think they're able to utilize emotion. And I would plug emotion then into Nien and say freedom from emotions, well, in the midst of emotions. Doesn't mean you don't have emotions, but you're not clinging and grasping to emotions.
But you're not in the midst of the usual emotions if you're a monk who's left home, which is a huge part of this tradition, which I think you have to deal with as part of this discussion.
So, if you look at the leaving home experience as a renunciation of repressive emotions, you're right. However, if you look at it as an elevation and the moving of emotions to a different ground of refinement rather than impression, then it's a different picture. And so, one of the things, for example, in the cultivation of leaving home, and you'll see it in the Buddha's own life, he leaves the palace and he leaves his wife and family and goes off, but he returns. He returns to teach and liberate them what he discovered. His son then becomes a monk out of the inspiration of he found a path to end suffering. So he didn't renounce or reject. He took those emotions and, if you will, expanded them rather than repressed them. He expanded them and say, all children are my children. All living beings are my family. And so the emotional field has gone from narrow and selfish me and mine to being refined to some of this more agape and storge for all. So it's not an absence of or even a renunciation of, but a refinement of and an expansion of. Because otherwise it won't work. But the fully human then would be repressed. So this is why I'm saying it's like you have to look at this in a very subtle way, because it can look like it's cut off and renounced. But actually the goal is to let go of the small so that you can open your heart to something bigger. Because usually emotions are in fact a kind of narrow enslaving of identity. But when they're refined and elevated, they become an expansive release of kindness, compassion, gathering in, and inclusiveness. So this is, I think, what's being talked about here. It's talking about changing them into something greater, more rich, more inclusive, and in a sense, more useful to us. Because I don't think, I was saying this last week, you got Guanyin Bodhisattva, right? Guanyin Bodhisattva. And what's happening with Guanyin Bodhisattva? Well, in the world, in the Buddhist world, there's all sorts of people going, Guanyin, Guanyin, help me, save me, give me, whatever. And Guanyin Bodhisattva is impassive, unmoving. The Bodhisattva. What? Bob Guan. I don't respond. I don't pay attention. No. She or he is the embodiment of responsive compassion. Well, how does he or she do that? They must have some sensitivity. Duh. They must have feelings available to know. How do I know what you're asking or feeling? How can I respond if I don't know what that corresponding thing is? You look like you're emotional. I have to go to my taxonomy. Like there's a wrinkle here and let's get your... No, they know it empathically. Yet, they're not swept away and consumed by it. They're not enslaved by it. Now that's a very interesting thing. So that's why they sometimes use, it says, in the fire but not burned, is the bodhisattva. It doesn't mean they're they're in the fire but they're not burned. So I'm saying to be a bodhisattva, not only can you you cannot repress your emotions, you absolutely have to refine them, because you can't do the bodhisattva's work without full capacity of your emotional repertoire, at the same time not being enslaved or inebriated by it or swept away by it. Wow. By the way, just for those who are interested, I didn't do the technical stuff tonight because we're looking at the characters and what, but it's interesting to me that sometimes this is translated as feelings, but in the 5 skandhas, the second Vedana, which are feelings, have to do actually with sensations. The Chinese is shou, 4th turn, which means to embrace, to receive. It means to take in. That's Vedana, which is one of the 5, the second skandha. But Qing doesn't mean that. So it's not used for feelings in the text as one of those categories. And in fact, in some texts, and I'm just starting to explore this, Wangxiang, or Wangnian, sometimes meaning wrong thinking, wrong thoughts, is used interchangeably with Wangqing, which means basically they're meaning the same thing. So feeling, thinking, emotion, whatnot is in the same range of mental capacities that when used rightly become awakening, and when used wrongly misguide. And so it's like a very interesting thing that's going on here. You can't get rid of thought, you don't get rid of your emotions either. You have to use them in this way. So that, I didn't want to bore you too much, but I'm just saying this is the kind of stuff I'm interested in. Then I go back to my experiences, my own experiences. I haven't been able to repress my emotions. They've gotten a little better, and I can use them more, I think. But I was one instance I'll just share with you, and I said I use my teacher sometimes as a thing. So a number of years ago, he organized a big conference on wanted to bring psychologists and sociologists and social workers together for a conference around the Dharma and social engaged along these lines. And I was sitting next to him at the conference, and the woman that was presenting started to give the sociological data, statistics on children who were unparented, underparented, neglected, orphaned, under states of different kinds of abuse and whatnot. And I was sitting next to my teacher, and the statistics started to roll out, and they were mind-boggling. It was mind-boggling. It's almost like you read the statistics of hunger in America and you realize 30 to 40% of children in the United States don't have enough food to eat. You go, whoa. So these things started to roll out. And I looked over my teacher and I could see this tear coming down out of his eye, on his cheek. And I was like, wow, what's going on there? Because I thought he was an awakened master who had, stopped him. In my mind, I thought that was what emotions were stopped at this point. It wasn't. But no, there was a tear of response to what he was hearing. In his, quote, imagination, he was empathetically, or even not imagination, immediately at one with all those people who were suffering. So this idea of being one with everyone is great compassion, that notion it was not even a thought. There was this immediate response of whatever that tear represented, I don't know. But it quickly, of course, turned into action. He encouraged us to work harder at the schools, the elementary school and the secondary school, to graduate from the university and go out and make a difference in the world in this regard, and not just, become career seekers, blah, 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 for money and so forth. But regardless of that response, what I saw there was movement of feeling. And that told me something, that whatever, and I respect him greatly, whatever he was doing there, he hadn't repressed that empathetic ability, that emotion, if you will. Now, he wasn't nuts. He didn't overwhelm. It changed into some kind of action. But I don't think the action would have been as real if there hadn't been the corresponding stimulus of that empathetic feeling to do that. So in a sense, I don't have an answer. I'm just exploring this now. And it's seemingly like it's complex, but I think all of us know that's what we've got to do. It's not going to work any other way. And so the repression part, if you've tried that, you realize, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Even Freud, who wasn't a bodhisattva, he had a concept, the return of the repressed. He says, you repress it, it returns. It'd come back. It'd come back to bite you. So obviously that's not what's going on here. But if you're interested, sometime, again, we'll go into this a little more, but I think it's very important to understand the spirit of what the Sixth Patriarch is doing here is telling us to fully develop our humanity and not repress or shut down aspects of it. Kind of answers, but not. But that's okay. Any announcements or?
Nothing special. We follow from our normal schedule. For tomorrow, we have the 7:30 p.m. the lecture, and the Dharma Master Jinhe and Jin Chuanshi will give instead of Reverend Heng Shu, who is traveling in Australia somewhere. And we have the same activities like usual and during the week. And please check in our website for more information.
Okay, we'll do transference in English, which, by the way, is kind of an emotional thing. Hey, every living being, our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace, with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to great compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find reward. May all who sorrow leave their grief and pain. May this boundless light break the darkness of their endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding Li San Bao.